The Roman Siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The History and Legacy of Rome's Destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple, by Charles River Editors. Narrated by Colin Fluxman. Introduction. The Siege of Jerusalem. They ran every one through whom they met with, and obstructed the very lanes with their dead bodies, and made the whole city run down with blood, to such a degree indeed, that the fire of many of the houses was quenched with these men's blood. And truly so it happened, that though the slayers left off at the evening, yet did the fire greatly prevail in the night. And as all was burning, came the 8th day of the month Gorpius, Elul, upon Jerusalem, a city that had been liable to so many miseries during the siege, that, had it always enjoyed as much happiness from its first foundation, it would certainly have been the envy of the world. Nor did it, on any other account, so much deserve these sore misfortunes, as by producing such a generation of men as were the occasions of this its overthrow. Josephus. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE is arguably the most important event in Jewish history. First, it was the central battle in the First Jewish-Roman War. Second, the failure of the siege on the Jewish side resulted in the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, a disaster that would eventually prove both permanent and catastrophic, since it was never rebuilt. Third, it permanently altered the diaspora of Judaism in the ancient world. Fourth, because it was indecisive in breaking the power of the Jewish revolt permanently, it was also inconclusive, and led to further inevitable revolts that broke Judean identity completely. The siege of Jerusalem was a classic case of two opposing and incompatible worldviews. It was not the first time the Romans had conquered the capital of the kingdom, nor was it the first time Jerusalem had been sacked by a foreign power. It was unusual for the Romans, however, because it was not the final act that such a conquest generally was. With few exceptions, such as the Carthaginians and the Celts, the Romans had not encountered an opponent who refused to remain defeated. Roman generals and governors found this stubborn resistance unnerving, and that may have contributed to an increased cruelty toward the local Jewish population. Not that the Romans generally required an excuse to be brutal. However, the Romans were inclined to be tolerant of local religious customs, as long as the local population paid lip service to Roman religious domination, such as in the very politically motivated cult of the emperor. To the Romans' bewilderment, the Jews were absolutely, adamantly opposed to worshipping any deity above God, in the universal form of Yahweh, or even alongside or beneath God. At this point in their theological history, the Jews had become strict monotheists. Worshipping the emperor as a deity would imperil their immortal souls. Therefore, they absolutely refused to do this, and were willing to die for their faith. The Jewish refusal to tolerate the cult of the emperor in their main place of worship was a direct challenge to Roman political power. The Roman refusal to recognize Jewish monotheism was a direct challenge to Jewish theology. The clash of ideologies would result in many casualties. Josephus, a primary source for the revolt, would calculate the death toll at over 1 million. The Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, the history and legacy of Rome's destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple, chronicles one of the most influential military campaigns of antiquity. Chapter 1. The Sources for the Siege. The main sources for the siege are Flavius Josephus, 37 to 100 CE, through his books, The Jewish War, circa 75, aka the Judean War, or Flavius Josephus's books of the history of the Jewish war against the Romans, and Antiquities of the Jews, circa 94, aka Judean Antiquities, through the Talmud, Midrash Eka, and the Hebrew inscriptions on minted Jewish coins, and Book 5 of Tacitus' Histories also survive. Josephus wrote originally in Aramaic, though these versions are now lost, but his books were translated into Greek, likely during his lifetime. Josephus' works survive mainly through glossed Christian sources, since he was a near contemporary of Jesus and is a very rare outside source for his life, albeit a hostile one. In Judean and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?